to get started, but we're getting started. Um, Welcome to our third program of She Opened the Door, Ask the Expert Series Season 2. So Season 2 is very exciting. Season 1 was wonderful, and here we are in Season 2. I'm Linda Yuri Greenberg. I'm a 2022 graduate of SPS and a member of the She Opened the Door Committee. The She Opened the Door Ask the Expert series features Columbia alumni speaking about their experiences, their challenges, their achievements in an interactive setting with audiences from across the globe. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Kathryn Kaiser. Welcome, Kathryn. Kathryn is a Columbia University alum. She's a triple threat. She has 2 degrees from TC, from Teachers College, and 1 from SEPA in 2022. She's a retired head of school who supports schools in transition, which is a wonderful pathway that you're going to hear about. Currently, she's at the Harley School in Rochester. And she has a lot of wonderful experiences before that to tell you about during our discussion. Near the end of today's program, we will have an audience Q&A, and we hope you'll participate. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit a question. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. Welcome, Kathryn. As I said, it's such a pleasure to have you here today with the She Opened the Door community. It's exciting to chat and to delve into your journey into educational transformation. But first, let's take everybody back. Let's begin with your early educational influences and your experiences. During your undergraduate years at American University in the Washington, D.C. area, did you know from the start that you wanted to work in the education space? Because you then did both your undergraduate and a graduate master's in special education at American. What moved you to that particular specialty?
Thank you so much, Linda, for having me here today. Looking back and remembering my educational history, I remember going to American University because I wanted to study international affairs, and they had a wonderful program. It was in Washington, D.C. My mother was in North Carolina, and my father was in Philadelphia, and I had been split between the two, and D.C. was this lovely place in the middle, and I was really interested in traveling the world. And when I got to American and got my course list, I looked at the classes and I had signed up for one elective. And the elective was called Arts in Special Education with a wonderful woman, Sally Smith, who ran a school in Washington, D.C. For children. And when I went to that elective, she took me aside and really took me under her wing. I was incredibly inspired by the class, and I walked down to the registrar and dropped my major and switched my major to education and special education, and I never looked back. And that class was really transformative to the educator that I became. My mother was a nurse and worked in children's hospitals for children who were profoundly disabled. And she worked night shift because she was a single mom. And so I often slept over at the hospitals. So I had grown up with really profoundly disabled children my whole life, and played games and had dinner with them and had bedtime stories and all of those pieces. And I just felt incredibly comfortable in that environment. And this woman had started a school for children who were what you would call twice exceptional, really, really in-depth learning disabilities, but also exceptional abilities. And so the lab school was this beautiful school in Washington. It's still there on Reservoir Road. And she ran the school. She was the head of school, and she ran the special education graduate program at American. And so I worked in that school, and I pursued my undergraduate and my graduate degree at American, and then went to work in her school after that. But a typical class was an artist who would come to class and work with college students. We built a boat, all the things you could learn by building a boat. There was a jewelry designer, all the things you could learn by making jewelry. There was a carpet muralist, all the things that you could learn by creating a carpet mural. So we learned how to teach through art and through collaborative projects with children. So it really was like integrated curriculum where you could teach through another medium, academic content. And I never looked back. And I wondered as I studied it, why don't all children learn this way? Why is it only special needs children? Why can't all children? And the answer was it's too expensive. It's not efficient. It's easier to put kids in rows and give them information. And if you spent time doing this, then we wouldn't be able to run the education system that we had. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like that's how I ended up at American and how I ended up moving into the career that I eventually really stayed in.
Yeah. So you stayed in Washington for a bit, and then you went to North Carolina, where you still were doing special ed teaching. But then you moved to Riverbed Media and Reading Rescue. So can you explain a little bit about that path that took you along the way there? And then you joined the school at Columbia University, which for
Yeah.
those in our audience who don't know, is a private K-8 school that's affiliated with Columbia. So a little bit about the in-between parts and then into Columbia.
I think all those pieces led together. That experience in Washington, D.C., when I was teaching at that school, I met my husband, who was a working artist. We moved to Northern California actually because he worked in the film and new media technology. And that was in Northern California where all of that technology was happening. So when we worked together at the lab school, we had NEH grants, NSF grants, ways of really looking at the science, technology, and arts as a way to teach children. And so when we got married, we moved to Northern California for his career, and I worked in special education there in Northern California. Ultimately, the artist community was not in Northern California, the technology community was. So then we moved to New York City for that. And I was working with the Reading Rescue program. They were doing a research analysis of their reading intervention program. And I helped to run that research analysis and do teacher training related to the special education background that I had. While we were living in Upper Manhattan, the school at Columbia was being built. I walked by and saw the building going up and went online and looked at it. And I applied through the internet. We called the application the Flaming Hoop. It took 2 weeks and I'm a technology savvy person. It took 2 weeks to fill out that digital application. And I call myself a needle in a haystack because I didn't know a single person at Columbia or the people who were planning the school at Columbia. And I was hired to write their literacy curriculum. So I think that the arts and special education, the working with the art community in New York City. I wrote education material for the Keith Haring Foundation is one of the things that I did at Riverbed Media.
Mm.
And then my technology background in Northern California and technology and education was this odd combination of skills that was really, really interesting to what the founders of the school at Columbia wanted to do. And I finally found the school where all the things that I loved could all come together in one place and be a place where I could bring everything that I was passionate about and educated and skilled in, and bring it to all children rather than just a particular population. And I made that school my home for 20 years. I lived and breathed it. I hired every person who was in the building. I am incredibly proud of what that school accomplishes and who they serve and the curriculum that is offered there. I think it's magnificent. And it was just, to me, that was the crowning experience of bringing all of these different parts of my learning together. And I had this unbelievable opportunity to also continue learning at Columbia while I was working.
Yeah. Which sounds like, where did you find the time? I mean, you had a master's degree from Teachers College at the Klingenstein Center for Independent and International School Leadership. And then you got a doctoral degree as well. And your EDD was in culturally responsive pedagogy through communications, technology, and education lens, which I'm reading verbatim because that's a lot of a long thing, but it's still really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program? Because many in the audience may know about teachers, but they may not know about special classes that you took or professors that you worked with as teachers.
We had, when we first started at the school at Columbia, I had a hard hat because the building wasn't built when I was hired. We wrote curriculum on campus in Dodge Hall until the building was completed. And we had a lot of professional development from Columbia departments and professors as educators on educational theory and things that were happening in the world of education. One of the people who came to speak to us was Frank Moretti. And Frank worked in the communications technology and education department at Teachers College and also at Columbia campus on supporting professors in integrating technology into their courses. This was in 2003. And Frank, I found incredibly inspiring, and I really loved the learning that we were doing because, again, it was bringing together these aspects of my past and how I could use that in this new role. And Frank said, I teach courses on this, and you could take my class this fall. And so I went online and I signed up for the class, and then I got an email from Columbia that you can only go to Teachers College as an employee if you are enrolled in a degree program. So it's an affiliate rather than, you can't do non-degree classes or whatever it was. And I wrote to Frank and I said, I'm so sorry, I actually can't take your class this fall because I have to be enrolled in a degree program. And he said, submit an application. So I
Easy.
submitted an application and I took that class, and I had small children. I had this full-time job. I was writing curriculum for a school that didn't exist. I talk about how we got into the building three days before the children did. And so I really didn't know the building. You'd have a line of children behind you and you'd get to a door and you didn't know whether to push or pull, it's such an unfamiliar building. But I loved that class. That man was a complete inspiration to me. I was learning in a way I had never learned before. I had really taken classes before. When you study education, what they teach you is math for elementary school teachers, history for elementary school teachers, English for elementary school teachers. So, they were great classes, but this was the first time I was really being engaged in such an incredible way. And for Frank, technology was the printing press. It was, a pencil. It was how you educate through a tool. And this program was fantastic. And I decided I'm going to do this degree and I'm going to do it within 10 years. And I'm going to take one class a term. And this is going to be my time. I'm going to be sitting with adults in the evening, midweek. I'm going to be talking about things that really interest me and being inspired by my classmates who were coming from all over the world. Teachers College is truly a global campus, and the students come from everywhere. And I looked forward to it every week. I really, really loved it. And I got that doctoral degree in communications technology and education. But there was a little waylay period in the middle there when I had the chance to become in a leadership role at my school. I decided to do the Klingenstein Leadership Program, which was a cohort program led by Pearl Kane. Also, an incredible, both Frank and Pearl are no longer alive, but just an inspiring figure who cultivated independent school leadership in particular, where you're not beholden by the government or the education department mandating what you have to teach. Independent schools are mission driven. And the cohort program, who I'm still connected to all of the people, there were 50 of us who studied together. And it was a 2 summers and a school year program where you did an independent project. And that gave me what I felt were the credentials for my leadership aspirations, but also gave me a community and a lot of excellent learning that I did there as well.
It sounds inspirational. And I think one thing that I hope our audience can take away is that you should always keep learning, but also that you can have a longer runway. That if you say to yourself, oh no, I can't do this because it's going to take 2 years of my life very fast or something, you can spread these things out if you're lucky enough to have
And you can
a
love it and
place.
appreciate it and value it, which when I was a student was harder to do because it was about finishing. It was about becoming financially independent and having a job. And suddenly that's not the stimulus anymore. It's a true desire to learn. And you're not taking 5 classes where they all get stacked on top of each other in your memory. You're just in this one class. But for the communications technology and education degree, which I think is important for people who are thinking about studying in education, the technology was a tool. It was a vehicle for another kind of learning, not learning for the sake of learning technology. And for me, it was about diversity in education, the ability to educate children from many different backgrounds in one space. So I was able to take classes in the urban education program and take the classes in the technology and education program and look at ways that technology furthered this idea of diversity and the ability to learn from others. And Sonia Douglas, who was at the Urban Ed program, I think she still is, but now runs the Black Education Research Center, was just an incredible educator in the latter part of my doctoral degree, where I ended my in-depth research and projects, and just so many inspiring leaders at that college.
Wonderful. And we mentioned this right at the start, but you then went back to school again, one more
Yep.
time. You went to SEPA, and you have a degree that you just finished 2 years ago. So how did you feel that this new degree was going to be something that enhanced what you've already been doing?
I think when I was finishing my doctoral degree, that last semester is sort of the fix and finish on the dissertation. It's dissertation advisement. Um, I the tuition benefit requires that you be enrolled in a class, not dissertation advisement. So I signed up for a painting class at Teachers College, because I'd never used. They have a beautiful art program and a painting studio there. And I actually this is my dissertation painted. So anyway, it was lovely to be there and to be in that class while I was doing those last pieces. And then, you get information from the different colleges all the time in your inbox. And I saw that SEPA had an executive master's in public administration program. And I was like, what is that? That sounds really interesting. So I went to an open house, and the woman who was running the open house, I said I was finishing my doctoral degree in May and I was thinking about maybe this. And she goes, oh, take a break. Please take a break. She's why would you do that? And I said, because I love my weekly class. I love my weekly classes. And while I had less to learn at Teachers College at that point with a 20-year career in education, I the things that I learned from my classmates from all over the world, I was going to lose that. And
Mhm.
SEPA was a place where I could gain additional leadership skills as a nonprofit leader in that social space. But I could be not just thinking about education, but thinking about the other contexts that are part of social policy and work for the community. And there would be people there who were here. They come for a year. They do this program. They're sent by their government, or they're sent by a nonprofit institution that they work for. And I had this global class all over again. But we weren't just talking about education. We were talking about humans and society, and how our different pieces supported moving forward as a community. And it was even richer. But I was also
Yeah.
back full circle to that international affairs degree that I was thinking about as a 17-year-old, of what I wanted to do with my life. And I loved every minute of that program, and had so many wonderful, inspiring leaders and educators who just keep pushing me further. And my
Mhm.
community now of people that I graduated with, graduation was so fun. Um, we travel together, we talk about our work, we share in each other's successes, and we were all different ages and all different cultural backgrounds and all different forms of work. And so it was probably the most enriching degree that I've had yet.
So, in terms of the school leadership, how do you feel that those classes is there anything that you would go back and say, now that I'm doing the interim leadership, or even when you were continuing at Columbia, is there anything that you miss? You've taken so many wonderful classes. Is there still something left to take? Is there?
I miss Columbia. I miss I miss learning. I'm not taking any classes right now. There are wonderful schools of education here. I'm thinking about teaching some classes in the Rochester area, but there's so many classes I wanted to take as part of that program. I think there were 4 concentrations, and I wanted all 4. I ended up declaring the degree. COVID was a time where we were home a lot. A lot of my classes were online. I didn't have the community anymore. And I started thinking more about my own future, and decided that I would retire from Columbia, declare the degree. But I think I would have continued taking a class a semester for more than 5 years in that program, because there were so many phenomenal classes. But I learned a lot about things like financial management, because that wasn't something I had to do in particular at Columbia, because there are entire budget departments. I had a legal department that I worked with at Columbia. I had a communications department. When you're in a single school or in a smaller nonprofit, you're often tasked with doing more of those pieces. So the SEPA program, the public affairs program, gave me some really important skills that I use now that I didn't necessarily have to use there, but there were hundreds more classes that I would have really appreciated the opportunity to take.
So just to wrap that whole piece up, what skill sets or specific other things, particular skills, do you think for those in the audience listening who might want to take a similar path or move into different education areas and leadership, what ones do you think are essential to having an impact in this
When
field?
I was
Because
at Teachers
technology is such a big part of it.
Yeah, technology for sure. And certainly if you're in education, courses around pedagogy, around social emotional learning and child development. But classes that surprised me at Teachers College that I hadn't ever thought about before. One in the Klingenstein program for school leadership, I took an organizational psychology class. I was required to as part of the program. And Teachers College has an organizational psychology department. So it was Sarah Brasitis was the leader of that one. And my mind was just blown away by this concept that I had never thought about before. And then once you learn something, you can't unsee it anymore. You see it everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
I had never considered, I know psychology and, people and personality. I had never thought of an organization as an organism that has its own psychology and that people have valences for different behaviors, that there are
Mm,
stages of development. And I see it everywhere now. And in leadership, I think understanding something, if not lots more than I do about organizational psychology is incredibly helpful to looking at an organization through that lens rather than just a collection of people, that there's actually
mm,
there are things happening. It's like the trees that have the roots underground that communicate with each other. It's happening
yes.
with people too. And so I think that was a really moving and an important leadership class for me that wasn't about education.
Yeah. And it sounds too, it's a wonderful, circular path because it sounds like, you started teaching and then have moved into administration and leadership. And now you're saying, well, you might do some teaching in addition. Do you feel that there's obviously they're compatible, but do you feel that the emphasis on leadership has given you the sense that you miss teaching? And that was something where you started.
Yeah, always. My retirement, when I was working and going to school and raising children, my retirement idea was that I was going to go teach preschool. And I was just going to have my little class of tiny people who are so loving. It's just the most rewarding thing to work with young children. Working with adolescents is a very different kind of rewarding. But the leadership, when I shifted into that, doing more leadership and less instruction, there's a sense of loss around the directness, the direct relationship with a child, the ownership and the value that you place on watching them grow. It really is an incredibly rewarding life work. And when you move out of the classroom, you lose that. And so for me, what I began to channel in leadership was what I would call you have to teach through another person. It's no longer direct, it's through other people. And that's a whole other skill set, not nearly as tangibly immediately rewarding, and often the opposite. But
Yes.
I always say children make the best clients and adults not so much. But to me, it's like a stone in the water and the rippling that comes out. Your reach is so much greater when you work with others and through others, the number of children who are impacted by that. So building this school, the school at Columbia, it wasn't just my class that I was impacting, it was all children in the school. And I really did feel connected. And when I walked around and I saw things, I felt pride and a sense of accomplishment, but not ownership. It was better than what I could do because it was me plus others, and it was in
Mm.
everyone. And I found that to be even more rewarding than the direct work with a single group of children, and so much more impactful over a 20-year period.
Absolutely. So now you've moved into another phase and you've made that move to interim headship. Um, and I know when we met before, we had a wonderful conversation about learning a new school, learning where things are at a new school when you've been at some place and know where everything is, and now you're doing this. How has it been different though? What are some of the ways that this last year at Rochester at the Harley School has been different for you?
I think that the 20 years in one place and knowing everything and knowing everyone and having the answer to everything, suddenly you're in a beginner's mindset. You don't know anything. I don't know where anything is in the building. I don't know the name of any child. I don't know who any of these teachers are. Some of them have been here 50 years. They know so much more about the organization than I do. Yet I'm here to offer everything that I possibly can to support the community in a transition. And a transition is different than establishing long-term relationships and creating new programs. So it's more about addressing what is the immediate need, assessing whether that immediate need is everyone's immediate need or just somebody in a leadership role's immediate need, and then being able to adapt and understand what is the culture of this place, how are things done here, and feeling comfortable asking why is it done that way, and in a genuine, I'm trying to understand how important this is, and some things are incredibly important and can't be touched, and other things are, I don't know why we do it that way. So is there another way to do this that is more inclusive, or is fairer, or is more efficient, or an improvement for a student's experience. And so it's incredibly enjoyable as a learner to try to, I think of it as being like a live-in consultant, because you're not there for 2 weeks, you're actually living here, and you're living with them, and also trying to understand as quickly as possible and offer the greatest impact that you can that could continue and could last, and laying a foundation for a new person to come in and to be able to move forward in a better way with the community than maybe if they had come right at the heels of something else that had happened at the school. So it's incredibly interesting. I met a woman in New York City who was a retired head of school who was there for an interim, and it was her seventh interim. And she talked to me about this life and the moving around and the experiencing new places and different people, and bringing an experienced skill set to a different place and making friends and learning places. And that sounded really interesting to me. So that was the first thing that I did when I left Columbia, and I would certainly do it again. But I also have a strong desire to put my School of International and Public Affairs hat to work in another form of education. So I have an incredible interest in thinking about, in my final stages of my career, refugee and migrant education. I see that as a field that needs lots more research and preparation for what is to come over the next 30 years. And if there's a way for me to combine that education skill set with that global piece, that's where I would like to be moving towards.
Mhm. Well, you've taken a first step because you just returned from an amazing trip to Japan, which I know wasn't necessarily for immigrant and refugee children, but it certainly is part of your passion for international learning. So please tell us a little bit about the visit and the organizations that you were working with while you were there.
Or incredible. One of the things I got to do as a member of the school at Columbia and the Columbia University community was to be able to share the education that we were doing at Columbia as part of a university and part of an independent school that is driven by this mission and the ability to experiment and try things. I got to travel all over the world, which was just so wonderful. And one of the organizations I worked with was the International Association of Laboratory Schools. We've hosted their conferences at Columbia. They visited Bank Street, the school at Columbia, and the Teachers College, Rita Gold Center, the Hollingworth Center. Columbia has a lot of education happening under its roof. And I've traveled with that organization to other places and offered educational opportunities. So IELTS, which is the shorthand for it, was invited to participate in the OECD work around the teaching and the learning compass for Global Education 2030. So looking forward, what are the things that learners need in the future in education? And once that work was finished, what do educators need? In that time period, COVID hit. The education field took a loss in teachers moving away from education and into other fields. A lot of industries learned that teachers make wonderful employees. They are reliable. They have excellent communication skills. They are incredibly organized. They're well educated. And so a lot of teachers, because teaching was so hard during COVID, have moved away from the field and into other areas, and I'm sure are doing great work in those places where they are. So the teaching compass work has shifted a little more towards sustainability and the well-being of educators, because educators are so important to our future, and the work that they do with children is really impactful for all, because these are our future adults. So the global meeting was taking place in Japan, and there were exchanges, the opportunity to visit schools in Japan and speak with educators who were in Japan. So I was able to participate in the collaborative building of key ideas of the teaching compass, and then also have an exchange with educators at university schools in both Tokyo and Kyoto. It was just an incredible life experience. I've never been to Japan before, and I saw such wonderful teaching and school organizations, the way that the schools are structured and organized with a lot of autonomy for children. That is, of course, scaffolded by adults, but really not something you see in the United States, and pretty inspiring.
Wonderful. And I hope you had at least a day or two somewhere bookended there to walk
I
around and
came
enjoy
in,
Japan.
yeah, I came in a day early, so I got to walk all around Tokyo, where we were, gardens, temples, all of those. And then we ended in Kyoto, and I had a day in Kyoto
Excellent.
to go into the hills, the hot springs. I went to a poetry museum. It was really, really wonderful.
That's wonderful.
I
That's
hope I get to
wonderful.
go. Yeah.
Yes, no, definitely. It's on my bucket list. Um, you focused on technology and education as part of curriculum development. Where do you see change happening the most? And I guess any predictions, even based off of what you've just been speaking about, where will technology take us in terms of education and curriculum development?
I think before COVID, in the work that I did at Teachers College and in the educational communities that I was in, there was a lot of, I would say, resistance to technology in the classroom and unfamiliarity with tools. So it was more rote application, sort of things you log into and respond, so the teacher could learn how to turn it on and maybe get logged in. But it wasn't necessarily what we call constructivist, using it in order to create learning opportunities. And then COVID. I mean, I declared my doctoral degree in May of 2019. And in no way did I imagine that every single educator would have their hands in the tools, experimenting, piloting, trying, failing. That's how you learn. You try something and it doesn't work. And the level of skill in using technology in classrooms catapulted after the spring of 2020, because you had to. There was no other way to do it. So I actually think it's really exciting that many, many, many more educators are far more fluent in technology and using it in their classroom than prior to COVID. And it was by necessity originally, but once you learn it, there are wonderful things that you can do with it. I remember having a phenomenal conversation with one of the CEOs of Zoom, because when you work at Columbia, your parents in your school are often very connected to incredibly important people. And so one of the parents put me in touch with the CEO of Zoom in the spring of 2020, because we were using Zoom with children. And I was saying to the parent, there are all these limitations in the platform when it comes to a non-reader using it. And so, and you can't manipulate a child through a screen. You can only guide them verbally. And a lot of the things that they were looking at were written. And so I had this wonderful conversation. He wanted to know what's preventing you. And I'm like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't put them in a breakout room. They have to choose to go to a breakout room. We put children in groups and they go to the groups because we tell them to go to the groups. But on the screen, how do we get them into the group? And so we would just, I had the teachers make a list. These are all the things that I'm frustrated with in this platform, that if I could do this and if I could do that, then I would be better able to provide what the children needed. And they put it all in.
Thank you.
It was amazing.
Who knew we
And
would be
suddenly
thanking
you
you for
could
that?
create groups and you could just, open the group and all the children you'd put in the group just showed up in the room.
And I'm sure they loved that
Yeah,
because,
they want their reading group. They don't
they
want to
want
all
their
be
reading
contained
group.
together. They want to be in their little reading group, and then they all want to come back and reflect on what they did. So we could have morning meeting, and then we could have small groups, and then we could rotate the groups, and then we could come back together on the carpet, in the meeting area.
Right.
And
Some things you really can't do, but this is just, brilliant in terms of knowing that it was teachers that
yeah.
truly helped to create some of those things in Zoom that we all take for granted now. It's wonderful. Just two more questions from my end, and then I want to open up to everybody. So please be sure that if you have questions, that you do put them into the Q&A, into the chat, so that we've got your questions to ask when I'm done with my last two. So one thing that I've seen from pouring over your LinkedIn and your resume, you've been involved with a lot of different nonprofits, and I know as well that early childhood reading is a passion of yours. Are there ones that you can point to that you worked with, but also the ones that you are still eyeing and saying, I haven't worked with a nonprofit in this particular area for either literacy or equity or certain other things that you're thinking about with all of your free time?
I think I discovered board work as a young mother in Manhattan, where married to an artist, and my child used the New York City parks and everything that was accessible and free to us. It was an enriching place to raise a child, and we played at the Hippo Playground in Riverside Park, and she went to classes there was a little structure in there, and I said, "Is there some way that I can help?" I know that we are users of this system and they were like, you could be on the board. We need people on the board. We have an annual fundraiser. It would be really great. And that was my first real experience in board work. And from that time, my daughter's 32 now. So for the last 30 years, I have always been on a board because I think it is such an important part of contributing outside of your immediate place of business to be able to contribute those skills in a way to another organization. And like going to class during the week, you learn so much from other people. And it's not all the people that you work with on a day-to-day. It's this group of individuals who care deeply about an organization and bring all different perspectives to it and are able to enhance what that organization does through their volunteerism. So I have been on education boards with the schools that I've worked at, so lots of board work there. I was on the Reading Rescue Board in a leadership capacity for a very long time, which was doing work in the New York City public school systems. When my daughter was in public high school, she went to LaGuardia. I was on the Citywide Council for High Schools as the Manhattan representative. We met at Tweed courthouse every month, and that was an amazing experience. And I was on the International Association of Laboratory Schools board, so some of these sort of global school pieces. And now here in Rochester, I'm on the Horizons at Harley board. Harley has had a program, a nonprofit, for 30 years of hosting students in the Rochester area in a funded summer program and Saturday programs during the fall and during the spring. Horizons is a national organization, but they're regional programs. And so this is one of the longest standing in the country, and actually was started by the woman who I met in New York City, who was an interim head of school when she was the upper school head here 30 years ago. So it's just this nice full circle. And I think that work is so important. And I think I will always be on a board. And there are Rochester and Buffalo are both sanctuary cities. So I feel like there's opportunity here for me to become more involved in this displaced children and the refugee and migrant educational community. So that's the next kind of work that I would like to do, whether it's working for one of those organizations or able to be on the board for it. I don't feel like I have enough to contribute yet in the realm of pedagogy around that, but I certainly have a lot of education skill sets to bring to nonprofit work that's serving children.
Wonderful. I mean, it's funny because the last question that I have for you is, what's a personal passion that keeps you balanced outside of education? So I don't know if it's thinking forward to things that you still want to do, like the refugee and immigrant work, or is it more walking in a park, or is, what feeds your soul?
I've always been a 5-year planner, even when I was a small child. So it's like, what am I gonna, I think that's part of my husband says you talk things into being. It's not just like you talk about it and you think about it and that's how it becomes, and you tell other people about it. So I think that 5-year planning is something that helps me to move forward. And there are surprises along the way. And just because I say this is what I'm going to do in 5 years doesn't mean something else might not intervene and come along. But for grounding, I do a lot, and I work long hours, and I think about my work a lot, and I think about my family a lot. That the thing that is helps me is nature. And so I spend a lot of time with a lot of people. There are a lot of humans in my day to day. So time alone in an immersive, natural place is something that helps me rest and distance myself from that noise. And so I love a forest walk. I love snorkeling in the Caribbean and being completely surrounded by an alternative universe. And I love focusing on the horizon on a distant point and just looking out at the sky or at a water line. And those are the things that are soothing to me.
Wonderful. Those are all things I think that people could certainly take to heart if they aren't already doing things like that. Certainly nature is all around us and easily accessible. So let's go to some questions, some additional questions. What would you say? I mean, you've made a switch to a new environment. What would you say has been the biggest challenge that you're facing in terms of making that switch to a new school after so many years? Is there one thing that you laugh about, when you meet a child and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know who this child is or where they are? How is there a runway? You've been there for a couple of months now. What would you say has been that biggest challenge? And are you thinking when you leave Harley that you would like to go to another interim position?
So I'm definitely thinking about it. I think I'm participating in a leadership group right now with the International Association of Laboratory Schools. And we are talking about some of the challenges that we experience. And my my work life is so different from what it was um, just recently when I was at Columbia. And the biggest difference is not my knowledge, not my skill. Those things I'm still carrying with me. They're here. Um, it's the adapting culturally to another place. It is the relationship building and management is so completely different in a building full of strangers than it is in a building full of people that you've known for 2 decades. That's the biggest change. And so learning how to do that. I mean, I don't think you ever do anything perfectly, but learning how to do that in the least damaging way to yourself or to the people around you is a skill that I think I should get better at. Because if this is if I'm going to do more in the future, this is an opportunity for me to learn and receive feedback and think about what that looks like when you're someplace temporarily, but in such a public role. I think that coming to every encounter with care and with genuine value and respect for the human being who's across from you is the most important thing. It's the public moments where you are in front of a very large group of people. Those are harder. You're not having a one-on-one encounter. And so what is most helpful in those moments? To share about who you are or to try and learn about who the community is. That one's trickier for me, but I'm hoping I get lots of practice. So so I'm hoping with
Every day.
practice, with
I'm
practice
sure. I'm sure it
comes
is
comes
every day.
learning and skill.
Yeah.
So
And I just want to remind the audience that if anybody does have a question, please be sure to, to put it into the chat, if you haven't done so already. Um, For those who are really inspired by your journey and they would like to look into some of the things that you've mentioned, organizational psychology or other skill sets that have helped you, do you have any books or resources or things that you would recommend for our audience that might be really helpful for them to read? You know, something that I read recently, think again, you know, Adam Grant, you know, those kinds of things that might be very attainable, but also would give them a better sense of some of the information and learning that you've experienced.
Yeah, I think there are two kinds of ways to think about how what kinds of reading help to if you're interested in sort of the things that I've done in my career. The first one is unrelated to education and more about how I moved through the world as a parent and somebody working and where I am now. And a book that I read early on that really gave me permission, I guess, to do all of the things that I was doing was a book by Mary Catherine Bateson called Composing a Life.
Mm.
Mary Catherine Bateson is the daughter of Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, so raised by anthropologists, probably around the world, and became a cultural anthropologist herself, and navigated academia as a parent and as an intellect and as a woman. And she wrote this book called Composing a Life that was really sort of a ethnography of five women and how women herself, but then these other women um, balanced and struggled with motherhood and being a spouse and having a career and the world. And I found that book so inspiring as we are composing our lives over time. You don't just, it's not a direct line. It's not something that you can just name, this is what's going to happen, and then you're going to get that degree, and then you're going to be that person. It's this composition that you're building up over time. And so I really do look back and see that I composed my life over a period of time. And as I was getting older at Columbia and thinking about what am I going to do next, there was another book called Composing a Further Life. Was her book about after career, after family, after your life partnership with your spouse. What do you do with that last part of your life? And she was thinking about it for herself because now you're not thinking about your life, you're thinking about the life that you leave for your grandchildren. And she did another kind of ethnography of a group of women and what their further lives were, those lives after that composition of survival and paying for education and all those things for your family. And found that inspiring. And I thought, what am I going to do in this further life of mine? What do I want to do? And that's when I began to think about, my exit plan and what I would do next and what I want to leave behind. And so that's those two books, I think, really just helped me as a woman with many, many competing demands, sort of center these things that I'm doing have meaning and purpose, and they are under my direction. So that's one way of thinking about reading. Another one is just in the field of education itself, my chosen career, what I did. If people are interested in education, my real passion from childhood was inclusion and how people who are very different from each other can learn together and have value and respect for each other. And so some of the books that really helped me in that pursuit, the one I think I found really meaningful early on in my career was Gloria Ladson Billings wrote a book called Dream Keepers. And it was a study that she did of educators. She went to a community and asked the parents, the teachers, and the administrators who was particularly effective with a failing population, which was Black boys. So if this community is doing poorly overall in terms of their who's effective, and she triangulated around educators that all three named, and then went in and studied them. What are they doing? And it was fascinating because it wasn't a particular pedagogy. It wasn't that they were traditional or that they were progressive or that all the things that we know in education, like be this kind of teacher, be that kind of teacher. She called it culturally responsive pedagogy. And
Mm,
there were things that were shared. These teachers were very different from each other. Some of them were the ruler and the strictness and the totally rote curriculum, and others were creative and project-based and all these things. But between these educators, there were shared features of what they were doing that made an impact on children who did not feel at home in a classroom with a white female teacher. And so they were different races, they were different backgrounds, and that culturally responsive pedagogy was something I became incredibly curious about. What is that? What does
yeah,
it look like? It doesn't have necessarily a set of rules. It's more descriptive. So that was a great book for me. Uh,
wonderful. That's wonderful. Um, one last thing, because you've been talking about a wide variety of things. So mentorship, it sounds like your life, the way you've crafted your life and composed your life, has really been a series of different mentorship opportunities, and that I'm sure you've been a mentor all along. Are there one or two things that you can point to that you would say how to be a mentor, but also how to be mentored? Mentoring goes on forever. It's not a fixed time, but I'm just wondering about that, and then we'll move to our wrap up.
yeah. I mean, I've sought mentoring opportunities that are formal, like, entered an organization or signed up for a program where mentorship is included. And I think that there are formal places where that can happen. And people have said, I'll be a mentor. And so you sign up. And that's much more clear about sort of what the relationship is. But whenever I find someone who's doing something that I am incredibly inspired by or want to learn more or curious about, I am not shy about asking. It might just be to go for coffee. It might be if it's somebody who's in at Columbia University, having an office hour, but coming and talking and asking questions about their path to leadership or their path to where they are, things that they've read, things that they've done, and being genuinely curious and interested in what they're doing, I think is one of the ways that you create a mentor. And then sharing with them the successes that you have or the things that you've learned. I think that no one has ever turned away being told about something that I heard this from you and this is what I did with it, and now this is what I'm doing. I don't think that's ever turned away. I don't think it's a transactional relationship. I don't think that just asking someone to do something for you, but I also don't think anyone should feel afraid to reach out and connect with a person that they are really impressed by or really excited about what they're doing, or try to understand how did you get to that place? What was your path? And I don't think there's any one path to any particular place. So it's just a collection. I think asking a few people who are in the same role, you'll find that they all had different ways of getting there. So,
And you never know. You might be talking to the CEO of Zoom and getting them to change things so that the
at that,
children are going to be able to use
the
the
5-year-olds
platform.
can't read the button.
So absolutely. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Kathryn. This has just been a wonderful session. And, we all want to thank you. I will be the collective thanker for sharing your experience with us and expertise. And also thank you to everybody who joined us. I want to thank the She Opened the Door committee and the CAA, because it takes a village. We all have to be working together. For those in the audience, we certainly hope that you'll consider volunteering with the CAA to help get fellow alumni and me and students and everyone involved in meaningful initiatives like this, where we learn. Our next She Opened the Door Ask the Expert series is going to be on Friday, January 31st, 2025. I think that's the first time I've said that, at 12 p.m. And tell your friends to sign up for She Opened the Door so that they will get our emails. You can find, there's a link now on the screen. You can find us at the link, and be sure to check out past Ask the Expert talks. If you go into the She Opened the Door section, you'll see there's a tab for Ask the Expert, and Kathryn's talk today will be on there. So tell your friends. And if you want to connect with Kathryn or me, you can see that we have our LinkedIn on the slide as well. And there's the CAA information. With that, I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you again for joining us, and please have a terrific holiday next week. Hope to see you again. Bye, everybody. And thank you, Kathryn. Bye-bye. Here we are. I think it's just us.